I'm also extraordinary professor at the University of Pretoria, and this is rather the role in which I'm here speaking today. James and Nomzamo have been my wonderful team, helping me to to get this presentation or everything together, and so I know about where we are, I hope. Last time James introduced the theory, and now we are going to more practical aspects of measuring consumer food choice. I'm trying to change my slide now. Seems to be slow. Okay, now. I have studied my career as a sensory scientist, and I've learned since 70s how sensory science has made developments, and here I'm trying to present a brief history why sensory science has moved to consumer research direction, and then briefly about choices, choice factors, food choice factors, and I will make an introduction to how to measure food choice motives. But this will be actually the background for the interactive session, which Nomzamo Magano will have after this talk. Sensory science is only 70, 80 years old subdiscipline of food science. It's very multidisciplinary, and when it started, it was related to, or it was the relevant topic was the measuring product quality using human sense organs. It has developed and expanded a lot, and the role of brain came into the picture since 90s, and we have seen how sensory science has moved to consumer science, because we need to understand more the human mind for the reasons that we come now. When sensory science was studied, there was an idea that different sensory channels are working more or less separately. So when we see a product, we see it and evaluate its color or appearance. Then we smell it orthonasally, so sniffing. We get the impression of smell, and we taste with our tongue. We feel the tinging and cooling through kinesthetic sense, common chemical sense, we used to say. Only in the 80s, we started talking about retronasal smell, which is odor that we get through nasopharynx. So when we feel like, let's say, an apple aroma in the mouth, we get the sensation through retronasally. Or when we smell like a strawberry in our mouth, it comes, the strawberry aroma part comes through the odor, which comes from nasopharynx. And we touch, and we get the texture, and we hear, and we in the case of apple, we hear how crisp it is. So this is how things were going, and all senses were playing their role. Then we came to to the brain issue or brain aspect. We started learning that when we, for example, taste a product, we we start feeling also that taste will help our sense of smell to work better when we are smelling the apple, for example. All these sensations that we are getting seems to be working in an integrated way, so that as the end result, we are getting an integrated picture of what we are now experiencing, that it is an apple. So we started realizing that brain is there that it's probably the most important organ for sensory testing, in fact. And here we come, then through this route, we come to the idea that, or to the phase which we experience now in the case of consumer research. We realize that our brain is actually working very hard, and we have a lot of thinking going on when we perceive an apple. First of all, when we see the product, we very easily, very fast make decisions on whether this product is edible, whether we like it or not, and if we have previous experience of such products, we can also judge how what the product is compared to what we expected it to be. So this sort of reactions come very fast from our brain. And we are getting even a lot of more perceptions. When we have a stimulus there, it activates our thinking, and so our higher cognitive processes. For example, we relate this perception to our idea of how healthy or unhealthy this product is, for example. What is the price compared to what we can afford, for example, and how convenient the product is, how it relates to our weight problems. Is this food something that fits into the situation where we are perhaps going to eat it? And all these thoughts can be there, but we give them subjectively different meanings, because the weight problem, for example, can be there for some of us, and for others it is irrelevant. Or health may have different importance for different people. Now we have all these things crossing our mind when we see the apple, for example, and being scientists, we are of course not happy knowing that they are going there. We want to make some sense of what is going on there and how important it is, and we want to measure it. We want to know that we want to quantify these perceptions. They are not as easy to quantify as, for example, our weight or our height or our age. for those we have like very generally accepted rules how you measure them in centimeters or inches or kilograms. When we measure mental orientation such as attitudes, there are different things. The thing is it's latent. So it can have different aspects. I mean, for example, health can have different aspects in it. For example, we can think of the different components that are in the apple, or we can think of whether this health aspect fits in this situation where we are now, or we can, when we think of the convenience, we might think of the ease of cooking or saving time, or whether the food is available now in shop which is close. So we have different aspects to cook together to produce our perception of whether this product is convenient or healthy. Now when we start measuring, when we start quantifying such ideas that we have in our minds, we go to different measurements from food science measurements, or in general like science, natural science measurements. We go to people's minds, and the instruments that we are using, the measurements we are using, they come from behavioral sciences, mainly from psychology or social psychology. And the way these latent concepts have been measured in those sciences, they are pretty established. We usually try to get an idea what sort of things are going on in people's minds when they think of health, and we are looking for different ideas from people, from mass media, from wherever we can get an idea of general like what is going on what might be going on in people's minds. A very typical next step is that we produce statements based on these ideas, and people have to agree or disagree with the statements, and we are using them to measure the orientation, the attitude. Here I have to remind you that when we measure such latent variables, we might think of the same attitude, but when we start measuring, we have an operational definition for the concept, which we are happy with, or which we can find is appropriate for our situation, but there might be different ways of measuring this variable. I'm just saying that I will show as an example a very well-known scale, which is called Food Neophobia Scale, and the operational definition of food neophobia was developed in Canada with university students, and we have done recently in Africa, in Southern Africa, we have developed another operational definition of food neophobia, which is based on African thinking, it's not very different, but it is at some points we realized that the ideas that were true for Canadian students were not true for African students 30 years later. But we could also here, when we produce an operational definition of like in this case food neophobia, we can also base it on a totally different concept. We could just like follow how many foods people are eating, but you may understand this better if you are not familiar yet with the food neophobia scale. You will realize this later when we go to deeper into this concept and into this measurement. So this is food neophobia scale, which is probably familiar to many of you, and it's a very simple instrument which has been produced the way I described. Canadian students were developing aspects to be described by aspects that could be used in an instrument, and they were developed to be 5 statements that are positive to food neophobia and 5 which are negative. For example, we have the positive to food neophobia statement, I don't trust new foods. And we have a negative statement, I'm constantly sampling new and different foods. So people answer all these statements. They rate them from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And what we are doing to make the instrument coherent and make it consistent, we are turning the ratings of negative statements upside down. So if there is an item like I like foods from different countries, if somebody said strongly agree, which is 7, we will use in our instrument rating 1, the complete opposite in when we produce the scale. And this way we are getting from 10 statements, we are getting an instrument. When we sum up the ratings, we are getting an instrument where 10 means fully disagree and 70 means fully agree, and this is related to the neophobic ratings. For example, if a person rated I don't know what is in a food, if I don't know what is in a food, I won't try it. If they responded to this type of statements, or very positively and very negatively to I like foods from different countries, they will get a very high rating here. They are highly neophobic. This is not itself an instrument yet. We have to ensure that the instrument is reliable and valid, and this is measured. First of all, we measure the internal consistency, which is one measure of reliability. We measure it by using usually a statistic called Cronbach's alpha, which tells how well the statements the ratings fit together. And we also should be rating retest within an individual. So an individual would be repeating the measurements, and we would find that they repeat the ratings well. And another aspect is then validity, and validity is that it depends on the food culture, and it may shift with time. When I said that Canadian students produced an instrument that was very valid in their country, in that culture, 30 years ago, it may be less valid in Africa in 30 years later, and that's the reason why we developed a scale which should be more valid in this context in Africa now. Here's just a brief example of a very familiar distribution to all of us, a normal distribution of ratings of food neophobia. This is from a representative sample from Finns, and we have ratings from 10 to 70, and we see here people who are very little neophobic, they get very low ratings here, and people who are very neophobic, they are getting very high ratings, and most of the people are in the middle, more or less. The mean value on this scale in this Finnish population was 35, and if we had a completely unskewed normal distribution, the mean value would actually be 40, because we would be somewhere between 10 and or in the middle of between 10 and 70. But a typical feature of food neophobia scores is that we have a long tail, so there are usually a few people who are very extreme in this relationship, on this scale. So this is what happens on the scale, and how does all this, like for example food neophobia, how does it relate to food acceptance? We usually see that more neophobic people, this is a European study, and we see that, and these people were rating tropical juice, which is unfamiliar to people, to them, and they rated them on from 1 to 9. 9 is I like, extremely disliked, and taste, overall liking. Taste is extremely disliked in these ratings, and purchase buying intention was also, I don't precisely remember the anchors of the scale, but anyway, purchase interest grows when the rating grows. And they divided their juice tasters into 2 groups: low food neophobia and high food neophobia. And you can see easily that if people are neophobic, they will like the product in general less. They don't like its taste as much as the less neophobic, and they are less interested in buying the product. This is a very general picture. It varies a lot depending on the products about which we are asking. For example, in the Finnish populations, we have found that when we ask about any exotic or ethnic products, we are getting a big difference between the very neophobic or less neophobic people. But when we ask, for example, about different meat products, we get much less difference between neophobic and less neophobic people. But this is generally how food neophobia affects ratings. And so it affects our food world, our perception of foods in general. We are not restricting ourselves to food neophobia. Only here I just showed it as an example because the scale is so much used and familiar to many. There are scales that have been produced. I'm here showing some of them. First of all, food neophobia instruments. There are various instruments available. Some of them are particularly developed for children. Some of them are specifically focusing on fruit and vegetables, for example. And there's a good review on the instruments here in this reference. But their basic feature is that basic focus is that they aim to quantify the individual reluctance to try unfamiliar or novel foods. In Western world, dieting has been a very important topic for decades. And one instrument which is very much used is 3-factor eating questionnaire, which is measuring different aspects of dieting. We have developed in my laboratory health and taste scales that has subscales that quantify different health and pleasure aspects in food attitudes. And then there is a very widely used food choice questionnaire, which was developed in Great Britain some 30 years ago. And it is trying to cover any food choice aspects, any aspects that are there to affecting our food choice. These instruments that have been published so far, they have been developed in Western food cultures. So I'm showing you a summary just to remember that when we see or experience a product, there are if we use two categories, we can use the category of sensory or the sensory channel. We can get an impression of how the food tastes, what we perceive by our senses of the product. But we have to remember that there's the mental orientations that are also affecting the perception of the product. We are differently neophobic, all of us. It's our individual characteristic. We perceive healthiness differently. We perceive the importance of convenience differently. So this is summary of this, but we have to. So we have to think again, why is it important for us to understand what is going on here? It is, of course, that we are trying to understand why people choose the foods that they choose, because that's the final criterion for whether it is health or nutrition that we are interested in, or whether we are interested in how our product is performing in the market. We are interested in the choice, and the factors which are things that are going on, whether it is taste or mental constructs, they are considered as predictors of this choice. When we go to food choice, we have to remember that food choice can be measured in many ways. If we are talking strictly about food choice, we can measure whether people choose or don't choose a product. Or we can look at what they choose and how happy they are choosing different products, how likely they will be choosing them, and so on. We can also, when people often talk about food choice, when they in fact are reported or observed consumption frequencies. We are using food choice concept for intended consumption or buying intention. Or we are talking about food choice even when we ask people how much they ate. So we have to be careful looking when we look at the different research documents and to aim to understand what is really being done. We have to look at how food choice was measured. Here is a sort of like a simplified picture of what research has found so far about food choice. We know very clearly that food choice, whether it is likelihood or choice of one option over the other, is predicted by how much the option is liked. So liking and pleasantness always comes as one of the most important predictors in food choice. Then we have found that attitudes and mental orientations, they are increasingly important in predicting food choice. And there's a lot of research on how our expectation of a product affects the actual product perception, and through that it can affect food choice. And we have many other factors that have been shown to affect choice. Our perceived hunger is in the play, demographics, age, gender affect, for example, age and gender affect the food choice, and context, which can be like eating context or the cultural context, they affect the choice. Yet we have to remember that even that we get this sort of connections and we can build even paths between them. I mean, they are not always like directly in the picture. They can have one of the factors affects the other. For example, expectation affects liking, and liking affects food choice. We have this picture, but we have to remember that food choice is still a complex process that we don't fully understand. The quality of food in different situations and in different cultural contexts vary, quantity foods available and options vary. Food cultures are different, so the choice among options can be very different in different cultures. When we are working on a aspect like this, like when we are in the society, we have to remember that societies change in time. So what was true 30 years ago or 50 years ago for food choice is not anymore true today. And then consumers have various behaviors and various motives to choose food. But here actually like two conclusions from the food choice. Sensory quality is usually given as a reason for food choice. Sometimes it is like an umbrella concept. People like a food because they have already internalized their attitudes and orientations and the cultural appropriateness into liking, so that their liking actually covers many aspects of foods. And then the second one, information about the products, attitudes, and other psychological factors affect our food choice increasingly, because there's so much information in the air and there's so much talk about food. So we have all this in our minds when we are making the choices. And so now I think I will thank you, all of you, for listening, and here's my contact information if you want to get back to me. Nomzamo Magano will continue with the interactive session. I'm not sure if we are going to have a break between, but this is what James McCamey probably tells us. But I will stop my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Heli. It was a very interesting presentation, obviously, from a well-experienced scientist who we feel blessed this job. It's time for questions, colleagues. I saw earlier on that Margaret had her hand raised up. You can proceed to ask the question that you wanted to ask. We can also, my apologies, I forgot to mention this from the beginning. We can also write the questions in the chat box as the presenter is presenting. And as usual, we often ask our questions in the end. Yes, over to you guys to ask your questions so that Heli can respond. Margaret, do you still have your question? Okay, if there are no questions at the moment, maybe Haley, I can just ask one question out of interest to you. Whilst Nomzamo is preparing, to let us know if she's prepared just to continue now or to have a break and then we continue afterwards. My question is about the importance of studying consumer food choice, the topic that you are actually presenting. Can you just explain a bit to us how important this is, especially in terms of public health, looking at the current situation in Africa even, whereby a number of diet-related diseases are on the rise? How can you relate this topic to the epidemiology of diet-related diseases? Thank you.
I think that it is extremely important in this phase of the world. It's extremely important to understand what is going on in people's minds when they make their choices. And I've been actually always been between the two aspects of the importance of food choice. When I act as a food scientist, I feel like I'm on the side of a producer. How can you make a product that will be acceptable to people? So in a way, the commercial aspect. But I'm a nutritionist by my background, and for that reason, I've always found it very well justified to ask, why do people make these choices? Because we have to, it's equally important to understand, it's extremely important to understand from the health point of view, why people reject certain foods or what makes them choose another food. And this is funny, now that I have this still very thin experience of Africa, we realized right away when we had a workshop with African graduate students, we realized that this is very, very important also in Africa. I mean, your mental orientations are really, really advising you on what you want to have. One thing that I have, I think that this is something what my colleague Riette de Kock has been working very much is like, why don't people want to eat sorghum-based bread, which is tastier and like indigenous compared to white wheat, which is less nutritious and not indigenous. So we have to try to understand better, for example, this very detail to help promoting health. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you, Prof, for that. There is a question from Jedida. He says, in this kind of study, what would be done when assessing willingness to buy a new product? What if you have your new product with you and want to access consumer acceptance? Do you ask these kind of questions? And how they test, I think, is there a standard questionnaire that should be used? Maybe, Jadida, you can unmute yourself and ask in a clarified manner, if you don't mind.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Makame. I was just wondering, because sometimes we make these new products and we want to assess. Okay, I'm asking about if you want to study consumer willingness to buy, because here we are talking about you will want to find out if the consumer is likely to accept your new product. I'm just wondering if this is the same thing. Is this the kind of study about willingness to buy? That is my question.
Do you mean that if it is necessary to have the sort of ratings like food neophobia or scale, or do you mean that the only like asking how willing are you to try this product?
Yes, I was asking like the food neophobia. Do you? Yeah. Is it?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think that if you have a fully new product, if you have a product that people haven't really seen before, that you want to offer them, it is probably very useful to figure out how neophobic they are, because that will also show you whether that's like that is the threshold over which you have to come if you want to have this product acceptable among those people. Or on the other hand, you can see that people who are very little neophobic, if they are interested in this product, you can see the opportunity for the market in by finding out that this segment of people is really interested in the product. So I think that many studies have shown that neophobia really like sets the ratings of liking or sets the ratings of willingness to try at the different levels. So it's useful to learn, but you also have to. I mean, it's not only neophobia. You will probably, if you have a new product and you want to learn how it would make in the market, you would probably be also interested in segmenting your consumers in different ways. Like you want to learn how what age group likes them and what perhaps income level what likes them, if there's a possibility to define that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I can see that Riette is asking.
About the questionnaire.
Sorry. I can see a question.
About the questionnaire, is there like a standard questionnaire that we should use, or one can just design their questionnaire? Is there like a standard questionnaire?
Oh yes, that questionnaire is standard. That one which says with this food neophobia, which was developed in Canada, and we are hoping that there will be the African version be soon available, published, because my colleague Riette has already submitted it to the journal. But I can see that Riette is asking here, food neophobia sounds quite negative. Should we not focus more on neophilia? It is funny that this concept of food neophobia has been criticized very much lately on being so extreme and so negative, and it's just that it has somehow rooted so deep in our food choice vocabulary that I wonder how easy or difficult it might be to change the concept. I don't have an answer to that. I understand that it is a problem. It sounds like we are almost like studying a pathological population by using the term food neophobia, but I'm not sure if we can do it.
Yes.
Oh.
Okay. Did you see any more questions that we can respond to? You're welcome.
I can see about this. I see a comment from Sergio that Didac refers to the use of experimental auction. Yeah, experimental auction is one way of approaching the new products. It is a different whole word, in fact, because there are certain rules in experimental auctions. But the goal is, of course, the same: to find out how a product relates to others in terms of acceptability or prospects in the market. Well, are we almost in a situation where Nomzamo could start? What do you think, James? Nomzamo?
Yes, Nomzamo can start. I just have one last question. I'm just thinking something related to food choice, studying consumer food choice is food technology, neophobia. And now, as we were presenting, I was thinking about the issue of cultured meat, which is prepared in the labs and people must try it or consume it. And I also thought about genetically modified food in terms of food technology, neophobia. How do you think people can be persuaded to make these choices? Because we say they help alleviate most of the world's food and nutrition problems.
Yeah, this is well. I don't know how how the problem can be overcome, but actually I forgot to list the important scale amongst the scales that have been validated, at least in the Australian culture, which is the food technology Neophobia scale, and we can that scale can be used for measuring the neophobic reaction in people. So it's in a way, I mean, these scales can be used as a beginning of the thing. I mean, you cannot solve the whole problem, but you can identify the problem by figuring out how food technology neophobic people are. Actually, I should have given the reference for that, but maybe. I can write at least that. I'll try to write it here. No, I cannot. Cox and Evans have published this scale. So we are in the beginning of food choice studies, and in the beginning of developing appropriate instruments to measure people's minds. Even that scientists often think that well, this has been done already. We don't have to touch it anymore. There are the scales, but that's not the truth. That's like an intermediate phase. We have to figure out how the scales work out in different contexts, in different cultures, and we need instruments that are not only like developed in Europe or US. Okay, now Nomzamo is there speaking, isn't she? So I will shut up, and thank you very much for your questions. And I'm here if you want to contact me by email. Thank you.
Thank you, Yeli. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Haley. Can you hear me?
Yes, Nomzamo, we can.
Yes.
Okay. And can you see my screen?
Indeed, perfectly seen. Thank you.
So, okay. Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Nomzamo Mahano. I am a PhD student at the University of Pretoria, and I am privileged to be supervised by Professor Riet de Kok, who gave the very first lecture of this training school. And it is an honor for me to be presenting alongside Professor Haley today, also under the guidance of Dr. James Makame on the topic of studying consumer food choice. This topic is related to what I will be doing in my PhD. And so at this point, if you'll allow me, I'm going to switch off my video to optimize my bandwidth. Okay. So we are going to start by doing a short activity about food choices made on a typical day. So if you could all please go to menti.com, either on a new tab or on your cell phone, and I will also post the code in the chat. Are you able to access the activity?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to give a few minutes. I can see that some of you have started responding. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you, Wangari. I can see that you guys we have, let me see, 12 people so far who have completed the activity. I'm going to wait for just 1 more minute and then we'll continue with the presentation. Okay, I'm going to continue with the presentation now. Can you see my slides?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. James. Okay. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to be showing the results a bit later. Okay, now, so the activity we just did was composed of statements from the Food Choice Questionnaire by Steptoe and Co. This questionnaire was published in 1995 and it was developed based on responses from 358 British consumers, as Professor Haley mentioned earlier. And the purpose of this research was to understand the factors that govern food choice, because the researchers acknowledged that food, but it is in fact multidimensional. They also noted that effective dietary pattern changes amongst people facilitates improved public health. And to achieve this, one would need to understand the factors governing food choice. So the final product was a 36-item questionnaire, which formed 9 different factors. So these are the 9 factors with their corresponding items. The items highlighted in yellow are those which you responded to in the short activity. So we can say that each of the highlighted items represent the factor they fall under. So if we can look at your results, let me just show. So for this group, the item is nutritious and is easily available in shops and supermarkets, had the highest average rating. And those items the item is nutritious, represents health, and is easily available in shops and supermarkets, represents convenience. Okay, slide. Therefore, we can kind of predict that the leading factors affecting food choice for this group are health as well as convenience. And now the question I'd like to pose to you, and this is something that may have crossed your mind, is could there be more factors affecting food choice? And the answer to that is yes. There are other food choice factors besides those represented in the food choice questionnaire by Steptoe. Other food choice factors that have emerged over the years include those that are morally or ethically driven. For instance, fair trade considerations, where consumers are, for example, interested in knowing whether the workers who produce the food product are treated fairly or not. Other food choice factors which have emerged over the years are the plant-based movement, for example, in which consumers gravitate towards food products that are sustainably produced. And some consumers also prefer to purchase products that are locally produced. And then a more close to home food choice factor is food insecurity, where many people still live in poverty and can only eat what is available to them. Others also prefer food that will make them feel full or satiated, because in a study by Gama et al. On Malawian consumers, he administered the food choice questionnaire to them and also asked about additional food choice factors that were not in the questionnaire. And the prospect of food being filling was found to be important to 77% of the people who participated in the questionnaire. So this shows that the prospect of food being filling is important to them, and this is not something that's necessarily reflected by the food choice questionnaire. And as was alluded by Professor Haley, this makes the use of the food choice questionnaire in 2021 kind of questionable, especially in the African context, because the food choice questionnaire was developed based on responses from British consumers, and it therefore holds a Western perspective. And also it was developed over 20 years ago. And as I've mentioned, there are some other emerging food choice factors that have come up in recent years. So now I'd like to take us back to the food choice questionnaire. As you can see, some factors such as health and mood have up to 6 items, and others such as price and weight control have as little as 3. And there is a statistical reason for these differences. It is also important to note that these items are not thumbsucked. So the researchers you don't just come up with items and then present them as a questionnaire. So now this begs the question, how does one develop a questionnaire? How do you get to having an instrument that you can use? And the short answer to that is that it is a journey. However, a paper by Boateng and others summarized the process very nicely into 3 phases. And I would like to recommend that you get this paper and go through it if you'd like to learn in more detail about the process of scale development. So they summarized the process very nicely into 3 phases, namely item development, scale development, and scale evaluation. So the activities involved in phase 1 are identification of construct and item generation, as well as content validity. This basically involves deciding what you want to measure and then surveying the literature to see if there are no existing scales. So in the case of the food choice questionnaire, they looked at scales that already existed. And then for item generation, you can either follow the deductive method by assessing the existing scales, or you can follow the inductive method, where one can conduct focus group discussions or interviews to generate items or statements. And then content validity is the process of assessing whether the items are appropriate for measuring the construct in terms of relevance, representativeness, or technical quality. And this can be done by either experts or people from the target population. So in the case of the food choice questionnaire, they consulted experts in the field. During the scale development phase, the items are pre-tested on a group of people to determine the extent to which they reflect the construct and to assess whether the items produce valid measurements. The items can then be reduced based on factor analysis and reliability tests, for example. So in the case of the food choice questionnaire, they started out with 68 items and they managed to refine it to 36 items, and they extracted 9 factors from that. The last phase is then scale evaluation, where the dimensionality of the scale can be tested through confirmatory factor analysis. Reliability tests are also often conducted to establish whether responses are consistent when repeated. It says someone else has started sharing.
Maybe I see Nelly. Okay.
Okay, let me try to share again.
Yeah, so we can see now.
Okay. I think I was here. Okay. So the last phase is then scale evaluation, where the dimensionality of the scale can be tested through confirmatory factor analysis. Reliability tests are also often conducted to establish whether responses are consistent when repeated. Finally, tests of validity to ensure that the scale or questionnaire indeed measures what it is intended to measure are done. This step can also assist to determine if the scores predict future outcomes. And at this point, you can also draw associations between demographics and the factors. For instance, in the case of the food choice questionnaire, they were able to see that people with a low income, for instance, don't care as much for sensory appeal as people with a high income. And then finally, when it comes to questionnaire design, a few do's and don'ts apply. And this, among other things, is to ensure that the questionnaire is user-friendly and that it is not confusing to the respondent. That way, you limit the chances of getting incorrect or inaccurate data. So some of the do's include to keep it short and concise, use the common language of the target subject, so don't use like complicated words or jargon that only you can understand because you are in that field. And then a single idea for each question. Questions should relate to the topic of interest. So for instance, if you are asking about willingness to purchase, for instance, it won't help to ask what soccer team they support. And then responses should be in a logical sequence. So for instance, if you're asking about, let's say you're asking about food choice factors, you're asking about a food choice factor, a statement from the about food choice, the next question, it wouldn't like make sense if the next question was about their gender. So it should follow a logical sequence. And then some of the don'ts include avoid trivial or sensitive statements because you don't want to trigger people or put them off from completing the questionnaire. And then avoid negative and double negative statements because that can be confusing. Then avoid broad generalizations. Avoid leading questions so you can get like true data, and also avoid overlapping responses. And yeah, this is the end of my presentation. And yeah, thank you for this opportunity to present, and thank you for your attention. I will stop presenting now.
And thank you so much, Zamo. is ready for questions if they are available. I don't seem to see any questions, chat or hands raised. Abnomzamo. But perhaps just one question for you. I know that this is work in progress already about the underlying constructs for African consumers for their food choices. But do you have any
Dr. James, we are struggling to hear you. Your sound is a bit low.
Okay, let me try to. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, it's better.
Okay, thank you. I was saying, I know this is work that is in infancy, and I'm also hearing some echoes. I don't know why. But my question is, in terms of the underlying constructs for food choices among us African consumers, do you have any knowledge about what they are for now, or this is something that you are going to unearth in your PhD study?
From my reading, there are a few differences in terms of what affects food choice for Africans compared to Europeans, for example. So one I've seen is that we also tend to think about food taboos, and also our cultures influence our food choices. And then also there's the social status. For example, some people don't want to be seen eating certain foods as they are associated with poverty. And yeah, those are some of the ones I've seen from the literature. But yes, I hope to uncover some more during my research.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. James.
Any more questions, guys? It seems we don't have any additional questions at the moment. And thank you so much, Nomzamo and Professor Heli Torula for today's workshop. We look forward to an interesting training workshop again next week. At this moment, I think I can stop the recording. Thank you so much, guys.